Welcome to another session of spectroscopy or analytical techniques. Today we learn about spectropluorimetry, which is also called as fluorimetry or fluorescence spectroscopy. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe so that you don't miss such informative videos, and drop in your comments and tap the like button if you like the video after watching. At the end of the session, you'll be able to discuss the principles of spectrofluorimetry, state Stokes law or Stokes shift, distinguish between excitation and emission fluorescence spectrum, and explain the instrumentation and working of it, list out the advantages, disadvantages, and applications of spectrofluorimetry. Let us first understand the principle behind spectrofluorimetry. Spectrofluorimetry or fluorescence spectroscopy is a technique in which UV or visible light is absorbed by the electrons present in the singlet ground state to move to the singlet excited state, and it returns back to the singlet ground state by emitting radiation, which is called as fluorescence, and this study is called as fluorescence spectroscopy. Unlike other spectroscopic methods, here we have two types of spectrums, that is excitation fluorescence spectrum and emission fluorescence spectrum. We'll understand the process behind this fluorescence. This is a part of Jablonski's diagram. We are not showing the triplet states. We are just showing three singlet states, S0, S1 and S2. S0 is the ground state and S1 and S2 are the excited states. When we have a molecule, we have lot of vibrational levels within each singlet state, and the electrons present in the lowermost vibrational level of S0, that is the ground state, when it absorbs UV light or visible light, gets excited to any of the vibrational levels of the excited state, that is S1 and S2. We can also show S3, S4, etc. We are just restricting to S1 and S2. But when the electron moves to the higher vibrational levels, it returns back to the lower level of the excited state by undergoing vibrational relaxation. That is, it's not emitting any light, but it loses its energy in the form of heat. This we call it as vibrational relaxation. In case the energy level or energy of S2 is equal to any of the energy of the vibrational levels of S1, we have internal conversion, that is the electron moves from S2 to S1. This is again not by emitting light, only losing its energy in the form of heat. So we call it as radiationless transition. Again, from the higher levels, it again undergoes vibrational relaxation and comes to the lowest energy state or vibrational level of the excited state, that is S1. Once it reaches the lowest vibrational level of the excitation state, it undergoes fluorescence by emitting light. Here, it can come back to any of the vibrational levels of S0. It is not coming to the lowest vibrational level. It can drop down to any of the levels. And when the intensity of fluorescence is plotted as a function of excitation wavelength, that is, when this transition is taking place, the wavelength at which the excitation takes place, when we plot it, we get the excitation spectrum. And when the intensity of fluorescence is plotted against the wavelength of emission, that is fluorescence, many lines are there. This wavelength range, when it is plotted, we get emission spectrum. But one thing to observe here is the energy gap during the excitation is larger compared to the fluorescence, that is during emission. So when the energy is less, the wavelength is more, because energy is inversely proportional to the wavelength. So always the lambda max of the emission spectrum is at a longer wavelength compared to the lambda max of the excitation spectrum. And because we have so many transitions taking place to different vibrational levels, we are getting this in the form of a band, both emission and excitation spectrum. We are not getting as a single peak or single line. And this is what we call it as Stokes shift or Stokes law. That is, the fluorescence occurs at a longer wavelength than the excitation wavelength. That is, lambda max of emission spectrum is greater than the excitation spectrum. But if you have an atom or very rigid molecules where the vibrational levels are missing, we will not have vibrational levels at all. We'll have only S0, S1, S2, etc. Then the electron in the ground state absorbs the energy, goes to the excited state and returns back to the ground state by emitting the same energy. You will not have a longer wavelength. So same energy it emits. So then we call that as resonance fluorescence. This happens in atoms and very rigid molecules where the vibrations will not be there in rigid molecules. And the difference between the excitation and emission spectra. Excitation spectra, plot of intensity of fluorescence as a function of excitation wavelength, here as a function of emission wavelength. It happens from lower vibrational level of S0 to any vibrational level of S1 and S2. This transition occurs from the lowest vibrational level of S1 to any vibrational level of S0, and both the spectrum we get in the form of band. We look into the instrumentation part of spectrophlorimetry. We take a xenon lamp. We can also take laser or LED diodes. Xenon covers the complete range of UV and visible, that is from 200 to 800 nanometers, sometimes 300 to 800 nanometers. But it's a continuous light, continuous energy, unlike your tungsten lamp and deuterium lamp, which supplies discrete energy. This is a continuous energy. So we use xenon lamp, and when the light falls on the sample, we are using a monochromator. Here we are using two types of monochromator, that is excitation monochromator and emission monochromator. But in spectrophotometer we used only one monochromator and we just gave the name monochromator. If you haven't watched UV spectroscopy or colorimetric analysis, you can watch. The link is at the top. So why we require two monochromators is, here this excitation monochromator will allow only the chosen wavelength for excitation. So if we know a molecule will absorb energy between 300 to 400 nanometer, then we can choose that range alone. We need not cover the complete range of xenon lamp. And one by one the wavelength will pass through the sample. The sample absorbs light and it goes to the excited state and returns back to the ground state by emitting light in the form of fluorescence. And that range, if I know that the molecule will emit light from 600 to 800 nanometer, then this emission monochromator can be set such that only 600 to 800 wavelength is passing through it. And that also happens one by one. And the detector detects. One thing we should understand, that the sample will not absorb all the 100% of light entering into it. So after absorbing light, the remaining light will be transmitted. And we know that in spectrophotometry, we have the detector here at 180 degrees angle from the source, because we used to measure the intensity of transmitted light. Here we are measuring the intensity of emitted light alone. So the transmitted light should not interfere with the emitted light. So we are placing the detector at 90 degrees angle from the source. This is very, very important. The detector cannot be placed here. If it is placed here, it will measure the intensity of transmitted light instead of the emitted light. And here the sample cuvette will be polished on all the sides, because the transmitted light will go at 180 degrees angle and the emitted light will be coming at 90 degrees angle from the source. And if the signal, that is detector, normally a photomultiplier tube is used, and it generates current proportional to the intensity of emitted light. And if the signal is weak, an amplifier is used to amplify the signal, and the recorder records the emission and excitation spectrum. We can see it in detail. Source, that is xenon lamp, supplies the wavelength between 200 to 800 or 300 to 800 nanometer. Excitation monochromator allows only the excitation wavelength one at a time and for the complete range chosen. And we use a diffraction grating. Similarly, emission or fluorescence monochromator, it allows the emission wavelength chosen one at a time and absorbs all the other wavelength, and a diffraction grating is used. Sample or cuvette, as I said, all the sides are polished, and we normally use quartz to be on a safer side. We can also use plastic containers, plastic cuvettes. We are not supposed to use glass because silica present in the glass itself can show some fluorescence. And the detector detects the intensity of fluorescence light for each and every wavelength and generates current proportional to it. We use a photomultiplier tube. Recorder records two types of fluorescence spectrum: plot of intensity of fluorescence as a function of excitation wavelength and plot of intensity of fluorescence as a function of emission wavelength. And here, similar to your spectrophotometer, we can also draw a calibration graph. When we have a series of known concentration solution, we can measure the intensity of fluorescence and plot a graph between the two, and we get a linear line passing through the origin. And similar to Beer-Lambert's law, at higher concentration, the linearity is deviated. And we can measure the intensity of fluorescence using this formula. Similar to Beer-Lambert's law, we have epsilon Cl. Epsilon is the molar absorptivity coefficient and C is the concentration and L is the path length. I naught is the intensity of the incident radiation. Phi is the fluorescence quantum yield, that is number of photons emitted during the fluorescence process by number of photons absorbed, that is during the excitation process. And we can measure the intensity of fluorescence. And we have plenty of advantages. High sensitivity, that is, even we can have a trace amounts of sample like nanograms per ml also can be sensed. And high selectivity, because we have a unique excitation lambda max and emission lambda max for a particular molecule, we can selectively sense each molecule. And disadvantages, all compounds do not fluoresce. So as UV, we cannot use fluorescence spectroscopy. And it is not suitable for identification of compounds because some groups only will fluoresce. Just because that compound is fluorescent, we cannot tell this is due to this particular compound. And contaminants present or impurities present can quench the fluorescence. That is, it can absorb some light and the intensity of fluorescence will decrease, and this will be misled by us. It is susceptible to pH, so solvent polarity, temperature, etc. It is highly dependent on these factors. And if you look at the applications, fluorescent probes, that is, we can use in sensors to detect biological compounds, food samples, natural products, pharmaceutical samples, clinical samples. We can use for studying steroids, proteins, plant pigments, drugs, etc. Even minerals and gems which are fluorescent in nature, we can identify. And pollutants present in the environment, again we can use fluorescent sensors. And apart from that, in TLC, we have already seen in thin layer chromatography that if the compounds are fluorescent, you can use this fluorescent for TLC also. We use this UV lamp for determining the compounds. If you haven't watched in thin layer chromatography, the link is at the top, you can watch. And similarly, if you haven't watched HPLC, that is high performance liquid chromatography, you can watch, the link is at the top. We can use fluorescent detectors if the substances present in the sample are fluorescent in nature. And this is all for this session. Let us meet in another session with another topic. Until then, bye bye. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe and tap the like button if you like the video and drop in your comments. Thank you.